Step away from him now. Hands where I can see him. Drop the gun.
Officer, listen to me. That's not my weapon. He pulled it on the cashier.
Take your hand off that firearm and move back slowly.
It's tucked in my waistband for safety.
Officer Brandon Keller responded to a reported armed robbery at Grand Harbor Galleria on a quiet Thursday afternoon. The dispatch call had come in at 3:42 p.m. Shots not fired, suspect armed, customers inside. Mercer, a 16-year veteran of the department, arrived within minutes alongside his junior partner, Officer Kyle Ramirez, who had just over 2 years on the force. As Keller entered the electronics store near the center of the mall, he saw a scene that his mind interpreted instantly. A black man in civilian clothes pinning a white man face down on the tile floor. A handgun was visible tucked into the black man's waistband. Mercer drew his service weapon without hesitation. "Step away from him, drop the weapon," he shouted. What he did not process, what he did not allow himself to process, were the voices of terrified customers shouting over one another. "He saved us, that's the robber on the floor. The guy in the hoodie had the gun. He disarmed him." The man holding the suspect down looked up calmly, though tension ran through every muscle in his body. "Officer, this man attempted to rob the store at gunpoint," he said evenly. "I disarmed him. The firearm in my waistband is his. I secured it after taking him down." His name was Marcus Reed. He was 36 years old and had spent the last 14 years serving as an active-duty Tier 1 Special Operations soldier. He had returned home 10 days earlier from a classified overseas deployment. The mission details were restricted. The medals he had earned for prior operations were rarely spoken about. None of that showed on his face in that moment. All Keller saw was what he believed he understood. "Drop it now," Keller barked again. Behind him, Officer Ramirez hesitated, glancing at the customers who were nearly hysterical. "Sir, they're all saying, 'I've got this,'" Keller snapped. Minutes earlier, Marcus Reed had entered Grand Harbor Galleria with simple intentions. He had promised his younger sister he would pick up a birthday present before dinner that night. She had been texting him nonstop about a pair of premium wireless headphones she'd wanted for months. He had laughed reading her messages while walking through the mall entrance, dressed in dark jeans, a gray t-shirt, and running shoes, indistinguishable from any other shopper. The electronics store had been moderately busy, about 9 customers browsing, a young cashier no older than 21, then the shouting. "Everybody on the ground, this is a robbery." Reed's body reacted before his thoughts fully formed. Years of close quarters training activated like a switch flipping on. He identified the threat immediately. White male, mid-30s, black sweatshirt, face partially covered, semi-automatic handgun pointed at the cashier. Grip unstable. Stance poor, finger too tight on the trigger, nervous, dangerous. The other customers dropped to the floor. Reed lowered behind a display stand, assessing angles, distance, timing. He noted the robber's divided focus, money, exits, witnesses. Amateur, desperate. When the cashier handed over the bag of cash and the robber shifted his attention downward, Reed moved. He closed the 12-foot gap in under 2 seconds. His hand clamped onto the robber's wrist with controlled force, twisting sharply to redirect the barrel. The weapon discharged nothing. The robber never had the chance. Reed swept his legs, drove him to the floor, pinned him with precision. The gun slid across the tile. Within 4 seconds, the suspect was immobilized. Reed retrieved the firearm, engaged the safety by instinct, and secured it at the back of his waistband. He maintained control pressure, ensuring the suspect could not reach anything. "Call the police," he had shouted. A woman near the entrance had already dialed 911 nearly a minute earlier. By the time Officers Keller and Ramirez arrived, Reed had been holding the suspect down for almost 3 minutes. Now inside the store, the narrative was unraveling. "Slowly reach back and remove the weapon with 2 fingers, Keller ordered. Reed complied deliberately, 2 fingers on the grip. He placed the gun carefully on the floor and slid it forward. Ramirez moved in and secured it. "Release him, hands on your head." The moment Reed lifted his weight, the man beneath him, whose name was later identified as Eric Dalton, scrambled upright, breathing hard, eyes wide. Seeing opportunity in chaos, Mercer immediately grabbed Reed's arm and twisted it behind his back. "You're under arrest." "For stopping a robbery?" Reed asked, his voice steady but edged with disbelief. The cashier stepped forward, tears still streaking her face. "Officer, please, he saved my life. The man in the hoodie is the one who—" "Everyone stay back," Keller shouted. Customers tried again. "You're arresting the wrong guy. He had the gun first. There are cameras everywhere." Ramirez shifted uncomfortably. "Sir, maybe we should review the store footage before. I saw what I needed to see." Handcuffs snapped tight around Reed's wrists. Dalton, realizing what was happening, changed his demeanor instantly. His shaking transformed into practiced vulnerability. "Officers, thank God," Dalton said, feigning injury. "He attacked me. I tried to stop him. I think some of these people are with him." Mercer's jaw hardened. "Everybody out now. This is a crime scene." Within minutes, the witnesses were forced from the store. Several continued recording on their phones as they were ushered into the mall corridor. Ramirez made one final attempt, lowering his voice. Sir, it'll take 2 minutes to verify. Mercer didn't look at him. Do you want to question my judgment on scene? Ramirez fell silent. Eric Dalton walked out of Grand Harbor Galleria a free man. Marcus Reed was placed into the back of a patrol vehicle and transported to Central District Station, booked on suspicion of armed robbery and aggravated assault. For 6 hours, he sat in holding cell 14. He requested a supervisor 8 times. He requested to contact his commanding officer 12 times. He identified himself repeatedly as active duty special operations. The responses ranged from indifference to disbelief. "Sure you are," one guard said with a smirk, "and I'm a movie star." Meanwhile, a college student named Olivia Bennett, who had been recording the arrest from near the checkout counter, sat in her car uploading the video to her social media accounts. Her caption read, "Man stops armed robbery, police arrest him instead, the real robber walks free, share this." Within 30 minutes it had 500,000 views. By the end of the first hour it passed 2 million. And someone else was about to see it. By 9:18 p.m. the video had crossed 6 million views. Olivia Bennett's footage showed everything that Officer Brandon Keller had refused to acknowledge: the customers screaming that Marcus Reed was the hero, the cashier crying and pointing at the real robber, Keller shouting over witnesses instead of listening to them. Then something even more damaging surfaced. The management team at Grand Harbor Galleria reviewed their internal security recordings after seeing the viral post. What they found was unmistakable. Multiple high-definition camera angles captured Eric Dalton entering the electronics store, drawing his firearm, threatening the cashier and forcing customers to the ground. The footage clearly showed Marcus Reed moving with disciplined precision, disarming Dalton in seconds, securing the weapon and holding him safely until police arrived. There was no ambiguity. There was no confusion. At 9:42 p.m., the mall's verified social media account replied directly under Olivia's viral post with security clips attached. Full surveillance footage from inside the store. The detained individual prevented the robbery. Authorities appear to have arrested the wrong person. The internet exploded. By 10:30 p.m., major regional news outlets were broadcasting the story. Headlines began appearing. Hero arrested after stopping armed robbery. Police release suspect, detain man who disarmed gunman. Inside holding cell 14, Marcus Reed sat upright on the narrow metal bench, elbows resting on his knees. He had endured combat zones, hostage extractions, and classified missions under extreme pressure. Yet the stillness of that cell felt heavier than any battlefield. He had fought enemies abroad. He had never expected to fight disbelief at home. His phone, locked away with his belongings, showed 87 missed calls. Several were from an unlisted military number, others from family members who had seen the viral footage. One message from his sister read, "Marcus, what is going on? Please call me." At 10:47 p.m., over 200 miles away at Fort Brantley, a senior officer in Special Operations Command was finishing paperwork when an aide entered urgently. "Sir, you need to see this." The colonel, his identity restricted from public disclosure, took the tablet and watched the footage in silence. He saw Reed move with textbook close-quarters execution. He saw the arrest. He saw Officer Keller ignore witnesses. The colonel's expression hardened. "How long has he been detained?" "Approximately 6 hours, sir." The colonel set the tablet down slowly and reached for his secure phone. The call connected directly to Police Chief Harold Whitman's personal line. "Chief Whitman, this is Colonel Avery from United States Special Operations Command," the colonel said calmly, though the weight in his tone carried unmistakable authority. "You currently have one of my senior operators in custody. Master Sergeant Marcus Reed was wrongfully arrested after preventing an armed robbery at Grand Harbor Galleria. He is to be released immediately." There was a pause. "I'm not familiar with the situation. You have 30 minutes, the colonel interrupted. "The individual your officer released is Eric Dalton. He is wanted in connection with multiple armed robberies across 2 counties. Your department detained a decorated active-duty soldier and freed a violent fugitive. The video evidence is public. I suggest you move quickly." The line went dead. Chief Whitman, who had been finishing dinner at home, felt the temperature in the room drop. Within minutes, he was on his way to Central District Station. Inside the station, supervisors began scrambling. Officers were pulling up the now viral security footage. Every frame confirmed the same reality. They had arrested the wrong man. The shift commander hurried toward the holding cells. Cell 14 opened. "Master Sergeant Reed, you're being released immediately. There's been a mistake." Reed stood slowly. "A mistake?" he asked quietly. The commander avoided eye contact. "Yes, sir." Reed stepped forward. 8 witnesses told your officer the truth. Your own partner suggested checking the cameras. Instead, I was processed like a criminal. Meanwhile, the man who held that store at gunpoint walked out. No one argued. Because there was nothing to argue. Chief Whitman arrived 26 minutes after the colonel's call. He found Reed standing in the station lobby, no longer in cuffs but carrying the posture of a man deeply wronged. Master Sergeant Reed, Whitman began, extending his hand. I offer my sincere apology. This department failed you. Reed looked at him steadily, whereas Officer Mercer suspended pending investigation. And Eric Dalton, we have units searching for him. Reed's jaw tightened. He had nearly a 10-minute head start when I was cuffed. You're not searching, you're catching up. Whitman had no reply. Outside the station, reporters had already gathered. News vans lined the curb. Protesters held signs reading, "Arrest the right man, justice for the hero." Reed stepped outside into flashing cameras. He did not speak, not yet. Across the city, Eric Dalton was watching the coverage from a motel room television. He had removed his hoodie and shaved his beard, but the surveillance footage clearly displayed his face. Fear replaced the false confidence he had shown earlier. He knew they were coming now, and this time there would be no misunderstanding. Back inside his living room, Officer Brandon Keller sat motionless in front of his television as the story replayed over and over. He had made what he believed was a decisive judgment call. Now the entire country was watching the consequences, and the investigation was only beginning. By the following morning, the story was no longer local. National networks had picked it up. Panel discussions dissected the footage frame by frame. Legal analysts questioned the arrest decision. Former law enforcement officials debated protocol failures, but the most damaging evidence came from a source no one inside the department could control. Officer Kyle Ramirez's body camera. The mall's surveillance footage showed what happened before police entered. Ramirez's body cam captured what happened after. The audio was clear. "Sir, they're all saying he stopped it. We don't need cameras. Maybe we should verify first. I know what I'm looking at." The words replayed across television screens nationwide. Inside Internal Affairs, investigators pulled Officer Brandon Keller's personnel file. What they found turned public outrage into something far more serious. In 16 years on the force, Keller had accumulated 19 excessive force complaints. 15 involved minority suspects, 12 prior wrongful arrest complaints. 9 of those were dismissed for insufficient evidence. Several included language noting officer demonstrated poor judgment but no malicious intent. The pattern was uncomfortable. And now it was undeniable. Meanwhile, Marcus Reed returned home shortly after midnight. He had barely slept when his phone rang at 7:12 a.m. Master Sergeant Reed, the voice said. "This is Victoria Lang. I specialize in civil rights litigation. I believe we need to speak." Reed agreed to meet. By noon, Lang had reviewed the surveillance footage, the body camera audio, and the arrest report filed by Mercer. Her conclusion was immediate. "This isn't negligence," she said calmly. "This is constitutional violation." She outlined the path forward: federal civil rights claims, unlawful detention, false arrest, emotional damages, and potentially punitive damages for reckless disregard of evidence. Reed listened quietly. "I didn't want a lawsuit," he said finally. "I wanted them to arrest the right man," Lang nodded. "And because they didn't, someone else may pay the price." She was right. At 3:18 p.m. that same day, roughly 24 hours after being released, Eric Dalton attempted another armed robbery, this time at a small convenience store 12 miles outside city limits. The clerk hesitated while opening the register. Dalton fired. The bullet struck the clerk in the shoulder. He survived, but the injury required surgery and months of recovery. When officers finally apprehended Dalton later that evening, his face was broadcast across every major news outlet. And one question dominated every discussion: would this have happened if he had been arrested at Grand Harbor Galleria? Back at the police department, Chief Whitman stood before reporters. "Officer Keller has been suspended without pay. An independent review board has been activated. We are cooperating fully with state investigators." Behind the scenes, the state attorney's office was already reviewing possible criminal charges against Mercer: false arrest, official misconduct, obstruction for failure to review readily available evidence. Reed watched the press conference from his living room. He felt no satisfaction, only clarity. That evening, Victoria Lang officially filed a federal civil rights lawsuit seeking $21.7 million in damages. The complaint detailed ignoring 8 eyewitness accounts, refusal to review surveillance footage, arrest without probable cause, release of a wanted fugitive, emotional and reputational harm. But Lang did something else. She subpoenaed Mercer's complete arrest record for the past 5 years. The numbers were staggering. 46% of Mercer's arrests involving black suspects had later been dismissed due to lack of evidence or procedural violations. For white suspects, the number was 13%. It was no longer a single bad decision. It was a statistical pattern. 3 days later, Marcus Reed stood before a bank of microphones wearing his military dress uniform. Ribbons and commendations lined his chest. The room fell silent. "My name is Master Sergeant Marcus Reed, United States Army," he began. "Last Thursday, I prevented an armed robbery. I disarmed a violent criminal and waited for law enforcement. Instead of arresting the suspect, Officer Keller arrested me. He paused. 8 witnesses told him the truth. His own partner urged him to verify the facts. He chose not to. Cameras flashed. His decision didn't just affect me. The man he released shot another victim 24 hours later. The silence in the room deepened. I have served 14 years in uniform. I have deployed to hostile territories and operated in places most people will never know about. I never imagined that saving lives at home would result in being treated as a suspect because of how I look. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. I will pursue accountability not just for myself but so this does not happen again. Across town, Officer Brandon Keller watched the press conference alone. The gravity of the situation was settling in. Suspension was temporary. What was coming next could be permanent and criminal. The formal charges were announced 11 days after Marcus Reed's arrest. Standing at a podium inside the state attorney's office, District Attorney Leonard Hayes delivered the statement carefully. After reviewing surveillance footage, body camera recordings, witness statements, and departmental records, this office has determined that Officer Brandon Keller will be charged with false arrest, official misconduct, obstruction of justice for failing to review available exculpatory evidence, and reckless endangerment related to the release of a known fugitive. The courtroom would decide his fate. The arrest warrant was signed that afternoon. For the first time in his 16-year career, Brandon Keller was fingerprinted and processed on the other side of the system he had served. Bail was set high. His union issued a brief statement claiming he had made a split-second judgment call under pressure. But the footage contradicted that narrative. There had been time, there had been warnings, there had been opportunities to verify. He had chosen not to. The criminal trial began 4 months later. It lasted 3 weeks. The prosecution's case was devastating in its simplicity. They played the mall surveillance video in full. Jurors watched Marcus Reed disarm Eric Dalton with disciplined precision. They saw Reed secure the weapon and hold Dalton until police arrived. Then they heard Ramirez's body camera audio. "Sir, we should check the cameras. I know what I'm looking at." They heard it once, then again, then again. 8 eyewitnesses testified, including the cashier whose life Reed had protected. Each account was consistent. "He saved us." He told the officers what happened. They wouldn't listen. Officer Ramirez took the stand reluctantly. His voice was controlled but honest. "I believed we should verify the evidence before making an arrest," he testified. The witnesses were unanimous. "And did Officer Keller consider that?" the prosecutor asked. "No." The defense attempted to argue high-pressure conditions. They suggested Keller perceived a threat and acted decisively. But cross-examination exposed the flaw. Reed had complied fully. The gun was secured safely. Witnesses were present. Cameras were accessible. This was not chaos, it was refusal. Then came the statistical evidence from Mercer's prior arrest patterns. The prosecution did not need to label it as bias. The numbers spoke for themselves. The jury deliberated for 8 hours. When they returned, the courtroom was silent. On the charge of false arrest, guilty. On the charge of official misconduct, guilty. On the charge of obstruction of justice, guilty. On the charge of reckless endangerment, guilty. Mercer did not react outwardly, but the weight of the verdict settled visibly across his face. Sentencing occurred 2 weeks later. The judge addressed him directly. "You were entrusted with authority and discretion. Instead of verifying evidence, you relied on assumption. Your actions resulted in the detention of an innocent man and the release of a violent offender who injured another citizen. This court must send a clear message." He imposed a sentence of 18 years in state prison with parole eligibility after 15. Mercer was led away in handcuffs. He was 45 years old. The civil case moved more quickly. Rather than risk a public jury trial where damages could exceed projections, the city negotiated a settlement. The final amount, $21.7 million, the largest wrongful arrest settlement in state history. But the financial consequence was only part of it. As part of the agreement, the city was required to implement sweeping reforms. Mandatory bias awareness and evidence verification training, body camera policies preventing deactivation during citizen interaction, independent civilian oversight board with subpoena power, quarterly public reporting of arrest statistics by demographic breakdown, automatic review for officers with repeated dismissal patterns. Police Chief Harold Whitman resigned within weeks. An internal audit identified 36 officers with complaint histories requiring review. 20 were terminated. The remainder were placed under strict probation. Officer Kyle Ramirez received a commendation for attempting to prevent the wrongful arrest. He later became part of the Reform Advisory Committee, helping design new protocol requiring on-scene verification when video evidence is available. Eric Dalton faced separate federal charges. He was convicted on 7 counts of armed robbery and 1 count of aggravated assault for the shooting of the convenience store clerk. He received a sentence of 42 years without parole. During sentencing, the federal judge stated clearly, this defendant should have been in custody following the Grand Harbor incident. The failure to act appropriately enabled additional harm. Marcus Reed returned to active duty. Within a year, he was promoted to Command Sergeant Major, one of the highest enlisted ranks within his operational command. But he did not leave the issue behind. He used $10 million of his settlement to establish the Integrity and Justice Initiative, a nonprofit organization providing legal support to individuals wrongfully arrested or subjected to unconstitutional policing. In its first 3 years, the organization assisted over 200 cases. Reed also testified before congressional committees examining law enforcement accountability measures. He spoke not with anger, but with precision. "I do not believe in tearing institutions down," he told lawmakers. "I believe in forcing them to live up to the principles they claim to represent." 5 years later, the footage from Grand Harbor Galleria was still used in law schools, police academies, and civil rights seminars. It was shown as a case study in evidence verification, in bias recognition, in accountability. Officer Brandon Keller remained incarcerated, with 11 years remaining before parole eligibility. Marcus Reed continued serving his country both in uniform and through his foundation. One decision inside a shopping mall had altered multiple lives. The lesson was permanent. Assumption without verification is not policing. It is failure. The criminal conviction of Brandon Keller did not end the scrutiny. In many ways, it intensified it. State investigators began examining prior cases Keller had handled over the past decade. Defense attorneys filed motions to reopen convictions in which Keller had been the arresting or primary reporting officer. Within 6 months, 12 cases were flagged for review due to procedural irregularities, missing evidence logs, incomplete documentation, or witness inconsistencies that had previously gone unquestioned. Several convictions were overturned. Each reversal reinforced what the jury in Reed's case had already determined. The issue had not been a single bad night. It had been a pattern enabled by silence. Meanwhile, the Department of Justice opened a civil rights investigation into the police department's broader practices. Federal auditors reviewed arrest data, complaint handling procedures, and internal discipline records. Their findings were uncomfortable. Supervisors had repeatedly dismissed complaints as unsubstantiated without reviewing body camera footage. Early warning indicators, multiple complaints in short periods, had not triggered intervention. Statistical disparities in arrest dismissals had never been formally analyzed. The system had not corrected itself. It had protected itself. Public trust plummeted. Community forums were held across the city. Residents spoke openly about past encounters. Some were emotional, some were clinical. All were recorded and entered into the reform review process. The newly formed Civilian Oversight Board began its work with subpoena authority and independent investigative staff. For the first time in department history, citizens outside law enforcement had direct access to complaint files. Inside the department, morale was strained. Some officers expressed frustration at the increased scrutiny. Others quietly acknowledged that change had been overdue. Officer Kyle Ramirez found himself in an unusual position. Once the junior partner hesitant to challenge a senior officer, he was now teaching cadets about verification protocol. In a classroom at the academy, he played the body camera audio from Grand Harbor Galleria. "You will always have pressure," he told recruits. "From the scene, from your partner, from time, but evidence is not optional. Verification is not weakness. It protects you as much as it protects the public." The lesson was repeated across multiple sessions. For Marcus Reed, life had not returned to normal, but it had stabilized. The Integrity and Justice Initiative expanded into 4 additional states. The foundation provided legal counsel, data analysis support, and public education resources on constitutional rights during police encounters. Reed declined most television interviews after the first year. He chose instead to focus on structural work. When asked during a university panel why he invested so much of his settlement into the foundation rather than personal ventures, he responded simply, "Because the next person might not have a viral video." That sentence circulated widely. Back on active duty, Reed continued classified operations that the public would never fully know about. Promotions followed based on merit and leadership performance, not sympathy. Within 5 years of the incident, he was overseeing operational planning for multinational exercises. His colleagues respected him not because of the lawsuit, but because of consistency under pressure. The city's reform measures began showing measurable impact. Arrest dismissal rates decreased. Supervisory reviews increased. Early warning systems flagged officers with repeated complaints within defined thresholds. Independent audits were published quarterly. Transparency became policy rather than exception. The convenience store clerk who had been shot during Dalton's second robbery testified during a reform forum. His arm had regained most of its mobility, though nerve damage remained. "I don't care about politics," he said plainly. "I care that someone checks the cameras next time." The room fell silent. 5 years after the original incident, the mall itself installed additional public signage noting that surveillance footage could be accessed by oversight boards upon request. It was a small gesture but symbolic. Grand Harbor Galleria no longer carried the same quiet anonymity it once had. It had become a reference point in legal textbooks, a case study in academies, a cautionary tale. Brandon Keller filed an appeal 2 years into his sentence. It was denied. The appellate court's opinion was concise. The evidence of willful disregard for available verification was overwhelming. There had been no violation of his due process rights during trial. Mercer remained incarcerated. He would be eligible for parole in another decade. The incident had started with a robbery attempt that lasted less than 4 minutes. Its consequences stretched across years. For Reed, the experience did not define his service, but it expanded it. He had once operated quietly in distant regions. Now, part of his mission existed at home. 10 years after the incident at Grand Harbor Galleria, the long-term effects were measurable. Independent audits showed a 40% reduction in wrongful arrest dismissals across the department. Complaint review procedures were no longer internal-only decisions. Every allegation involving arrest discretion triggered mandatory video review. Officers were required to document explicit justification when declining to examine available surveillance. The reforms were not perfect, but they were structural. The Integrity and Justice Initiative had grown into a national organization operating in 14 states. It provided legal grants, investigative support, and policy research aimed at preventing precisely what had happened to Marcus Reed. Reed rarely referenced his own case publicly anymore. During a keynote address at a law enforcement leadership summit, he summarized it in a single sentence: "Accountability is not anti-police, it is pro-justice." The room was quiet. By then, he was serving as Command Sergeant Major within his operational command, advising on readiness and strategic planning. His military career had continued uninterrupted, defined by discipline, not victimhood. Eric Dalton remained in federal custody, his sentence affirmed after appeal. Brandon Keller remained incarcerated as well. Parole eligibility approached, but review boards cited the severity of harm resulting from his actions. The mall robbery had lasted minutes. Its lessons had lasted a decade. One decision made without verification had reshaped a department, reformed oversight systems, and created an organization dedicated to preventing similar failures. The system had not corrected itself automatically. It had been forced to. 15 years later, the footage from Grand Harbor Galleria is still shown in academies and law schools, not as a scandal, as a warning. Marcus Reed never asked to become a symbol. He stopped a robbery because that was who he was trained to be. The injustice that followed forced institutions to confront weaknesses they had long ignored. The lesson endured. Verification over assumption, evidence over instinct, accountability over silence. A robbery lasted 4 minutes. The consequences reshaped a system for a generation. And it all began with one decision: to see facts or to ignore them.